You are the biggest disappointment to this family.
Those chilling words came from Harrison Montgomery, the man who built a global empire from scratch. His voice echoed through the Montgomery mansion in Connecticut, like a knife cutting through the silent air. He didn't need to shout. His voice was as heavy as a sentence. For Harrison, every mistake was a disgrace. And to teach him a lesson, he was willing to take everything: keys, credit cards, even the supercar that had once been a symbol of power. Tomorrow, the young Master Montgomery would have to squeeze onto the yellow school bus for ordinary students. And Caleb, 17 years old, bearing the name of a famous family, but in his father's eyes, a useless shadow. A prince in a palace, but his heart was empty, cold as stone. Little did he know, in the dark corridors of this mansion, an 11-year-old girl was keeping an ancient secret, a way to see the world differently. And when Caleb learns it, the Montgomery throne will begin to shake. In the wealthiest corners of Connecticut, where the blue sky reflects off perfectly trimmed lawns and mansions sprawl like castles, life is measured by private jet flights and million-dollar contracts signed before a child can even read. There, a boy seems to have everything except a reason to exist. Caleb Montgomery. 17. Only son of a billionaire, should have been the pride of his lineage. Instead, he is spiraling, failing every class. Teachers have given up, and his father's patience thins by the day. Caleb himself no longer cares. In that world of gold, he is drowning quietly and invisibly, while everyone assumes he is living a perfect life. That morning, sunlight stretched across the lawns and fountains of the Montgomery estate, a private realm tucked among Connecticut's green hills. Through floor-to-ceiling glass, the light glittered off crystal glasses that had never been used. At the head of a long mahogany table fit for a state banquet, Caleb sat staring blankly at a plate of eggs, Benedict cooked by a chef who once worked at a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in Paris. The hollandaise was rich, the muffin toasted to perfection, and to Caleb, it all meant nothing. His gaze drifted outside a pool the size of a stadium, a garage housing his father's 10 vintage cars, and the deep blue supercar he'd received on his 16th birthday. Caleb couldn't even be bothered to remember its name. It was just another thing, like the luxury watch on his wrist or the private jet that flew him to Aspen for tedious ski trips. That life felt like a sumptuous play in which Caleb wasn't the lead. Across from him, his father, Harrison Montgomery, sat upright, carved in marble. He didn't need to look up. His cold gray eyes were glued to a tablet where stock numbers danced. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but sharp enough to slice the air. School called again. Another F. History, Caleb. This family has appeared in the nation's very history, and you can't pass a single exam. Caleb shrugged, pushing his plate aside. I'm bored. The word bored cracked like a slap. Harrison lifted his eyes, a blizzard in his gaze. Bored, your great-grandfather built railroads with his bare hands. Your grandfather forged a steel empire after the Great Depression, and I, from a small loan, built a global tech conglomerate. That is American history, the blood of this family. And you feel bored. Caleb lowered his head, muttering, That's your story, not mine. Harrison leaned in. Then what is yours? So far, it's a string of failures and laziness. The 3 best tutors in the world quit because of you. Not because you can't learn, because you won't. His jaw tightened. Caleb remembered the last tutor, a Yale PhD in literature, walking out while Caleb refused to look up from his phone. And Caleb wondered why Try the Future was set. He would inherit. A transcript was just ink on a story already written. I don't need school, Caleb said, defiant but hollow. I'll hire people who do. Harrison paused, then replied coolly. That's the weakest thing I've ever heard. You are the greatest disappointment not to the family but to yourself. He snapped the tablet shut, stood, and straightened his tie. I'm flying to Tokyo, back Thursday. Try not to burn the house down with your uselessness. Then he left the silence heavier than any fight. Caleb sat alone at the long table, the food gone cold. A prince in a palace, and all he felt was ice under his feet. That afternoon, Caleb dragged himself into Northwood Preparatory Academy, the most prestigious school in the Northeast. Tuition here was a trivial number to the parents. Golden eagles clutching books were embossed everywhere, symbols of intellect and power. To Caleb, it was a joke. He hadn't needed to apply. A new science building named the Montgomery Foundation had paved his way. Here, Caleb was famous for two things, the Montgomery name and his spectacular failures. He entered advanced physics 10 minutes late. Mr. Gable stopped and looked straight at him. "An honor to have you at last, Montgomery." Caleb smirked and slouched into the back row, ignoring the whispers. Some glances were envious, others contemptuous. But no one saw behind that arrogant mask. Caleb was drowning in something money couldn't fix: emptiness. In advanced astrophysics, Mr. Gable waxed on about how stars are born from cosmic dust to fusion, from nothingness to life. In the back row, Caleb didn't bother to look up. On his phone, a clumsy kitten tumbled off a table. To him, that felt more real than distant nebulae. When a pop quiz landed on his desk, Caleb didn't write a single answer. Instead, he drew a giant $sign in the middle and turned it in. Mr. Gable looked down his face, a mix of pity and resignation. He said nothing. What could he say when wastefulness had become a habit? That afternoon, Caleb was called to the counseling office. Mrs. Albright, a gentle woman with tired eyes and a trace of lavender, had tracked him for 2 years. On the desk lay a thick file: abysmal grades, missing assignments, apathetic behavior. "Caleb," she began softly, "your GPA has fallen below the minimum for graduation. Statistically, you're in the bottom 1% of the school." Caleb leaned back, a crooked smile. "Statistics are for people who have to try." Her smile trembled. "Your father is a respected man, a pillar of the community. Don't you want to make him proud?" Caleb answered, bitter. "He respects stock prices and profits, not grades." She tilted her head, her voice gentling. "What about you? What do you respect?" The question hit the hollow inside Caleb. He started to toss out a snide remark, but his throat tightened. The naked truth: he believed in nothing. Nothing felt worth respecting. In that moment, his arrogant shell cracked and a cold fear rose. "It's not too late," she said, a thin light of hope in her eyes. "The problem is finding something that makes you want to move." But Caleb had no answer. He left the office, crossed the quad, feeling hundreds of eyes on him. He got into his expensive sports car and drove to the coast instead of going home. In the driver's seat, he watched the waves. Each wave swelled fierce and then broke into white foam. Caleb realized that was his life, enormous potential collapsing into nothing. Night fell over the Montgomery estate. His father was half a world away. The chef and staff moved like ghosts. Caleb wandered the marble halls and entered the great library. 2 stories, vaulted ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound books no one ever opened. He brushed his fingers over spines: Shakespeare, Tolstoy, Faulkner. Set pieces like the suits of armor lining the corridor or the priceless paintings on the walls. Then, from a nook near the fireplace, came a soft hum. Caleb turned. In a small recess, a girl sat on the floor, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. In front of her was a pile of worn library books, borrowed from the public library, not the mansion's deluxe editions. One hand dusted the baseboard, the other held a book open. He recognized her: Susan's daughter, the new housekeeper who'd started about a year ago. The girl was always silent, as if she vanished into the mansion's vastness. Now her eyes were locked on the lines, her brow furrowed in concentration. Caleb drifted closer, thinking it must be a children's tale or an adventure novel. But when he glanced at the title, his heart stumbled: Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The book he'd been assigned in philosophy, but had abandoned after 2 pages, then paid someone to summarize. The girl, only 11, read it like breathing. Sensing his gaze, she looked up. Clear blue eyes, calm, unafraid, unflattering. Only quiet curiosity. "Hello," she said, small but clear. Caleb flustered, his heart skipping. "What are you reading?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "A book." She held it up. "About how to be decent even when life is hard." That simple line stabbed him with shame. He who had everything complained life was dull. She, with so little, was reading about strength in hardship. "Isn't that a bit hard for your age?" Caleb blurted, sounding condescending even to himself. She tilted her head steady. "Words are just words. Ideas are what matter. Ideas don't have an age limit." She paused, then smiled faintly. "My great-grandfather always said that. Most people wait until they're old to understand," he said, "and by then they're too tired to use it." Caleb froze. The chasm between his world and hers yawned wide. He, educated at elite schools, guided by top tutors, felt like the dullest person in the room. "Who was your great-grandfather?" he asked quietly. A flash lit her gaze. He was a soldier, a sergeant. He said what he learned in muddy trenches was more than any university could teach. She marked her page and closed the book carefully. He also said the most important secret in life isn't a piece of information. It's a way of seeing. Then she stood, took up her rag, and returned to her quiet work. Caleb stood there, a strange wind in his chest. He couldn't describe it. He only knew that for the first time in his life, he felt small before an unknown girl. Clara's soft humming rose again, leaving Caleb alone in the vast library, more lost than ever. A way of seeing. The phrase echoed. Seeing, he'd seen everything: million-dollar paintings, sweeping ocean vistas, treasures money could buy. But watching the girl meticulously wipe away dust the old book beside her, Caleb suddenly realized he was the one who was blind. The days that followed dragged heavy with the same stifling loop. The strange encounter with the housekeeper's daughter Clara clung to him like a distant dream he couldn't shake. He tried to forget her calm blue eyes, forget that an 11-year-old could digest Roman philosophy, but something had cracked. His armor thinned. His usual sarcasm lost its edge. In economics, the teacher spoke about market volatility. For the first time, Caleb wanted to raise his hand with a genuine question, something his father cared about, but he realized he didn't even know what to ask. After years of shutting his ears, he'd forgotten how to listen. The thought weighed on him. In the hallway, Caleb's rich friends ganged up on a younger student, knocking his books to the floor, laughing as the kid scrambled, cheeks burning. Once, Caleb would have laughed too. Today, he stood apart, a knot tightening in his chest. He didn't see fun. He saw cruelty. He turned away, their laughter ringing hollow and warped. He noticed Clara more, not because he searched, but because his world was so empty that small details stood out. One afternoon, through the library window, he saw Clara sitting with old Mr. Henderson, the gardener. She didn't just sit. She pointed at each plant, eyes lighting up as he nodded in surprise. Clara touched a rose petal as if reading the secret etched in each vein. Another night, Caleb stumbled on a chessboard left in the sunroom. His father occasionally played against the computer. Caleb had tried to learn, but quit out of boredom. He looked at the board. Black pieces were cornered, no way out. The next morning, walking by, he stopped. A black pawn had moved. Simple, unexpected, and it flipped the position, opening a counterattack no one had seen. Caleb knew Clara, and he felt unsettled that a child saw what he never had. Thursday night, Harrison returned from Tokyo, a storm cloud in his wake. A thorny deal had darkened his mood. He found Caleb in the screening room, eyes empty at a glowing screen. Without a hello, Harrison tossed a thick envelope on the table. "Report from Northwood. Grades, attendance, attitude, everything. You've set a new record for uselessness." Caleb didn't look. "I told you, I don't care about school." "That's obvious," Harrison growled, "but you'll care about this." He laid them down, one by one, a sleek black phone, Caleb's. Next, a wallet thick with credit cards. Finally, the car keys hit the table with a hard, metallic crack. Caleb jolted. "What are you doing? This is the end of the line, Caleb. The free ride is over. No phone, no endless money, no car. Those are privileges, and you don't deserve any." Caleb stared at the pile, his chest tightening. "You can't do that. How am I supposed to get to school like thousands of other kids? Bus stop at 6:45 at the end of the road. Don't be late." "Bus." Caleb choked. For a Montgomery, it was social death. People will see me. Good Harrison said, eyes cold as ice. Let them see the Montgomery name isn't a shield for failure. Maybe only public humiliation will teach you something. He turned away, leaving the decision like a life sentence. Caleb sat motionless, staring at the meaningless keys. His father hadn't just taken things. He had taken his identity. No car, no money, no status. Caleb was just a failing kid on a school bus. The next morning was a nightmare. Caleb rose before dawn, the mansion still dark. He put on the plainest clothes he had and walked half a mile to the main road. The air was chilly, clouds heavy and gray. Standing at the curb with his hands shoved in his pockets, he felt stripped and ashamed like never before. The big yellow bus screeched to a stop. The door snapped open and Caleb felt hundreds of eyes swing toward him. He kept his head down, climbed the cold metal steps, avoided every glance, and dropped into the last seat. The vinyl was cracked, the air thick with diesel and old gum. 20 minutes felt like forever, and that became his new reality. At school, the mockery was relentless. Kyle Jennings, the son of a businessman who once waged war with Caleb's father, was especially venomous. Look who's finally rubbing shoulders with the peasants. How's the bus? Montgomery. Did your designer suit get dirty? The cafeteria howled. Caleb clenched his fists, words trapped in his throat. Because Kyle wasn't wrong. He had become a joke. Without a phone or car, Caleb's evenings became vast and empty. He couldn't escape into screens or speed down highways. In the sprawling, silent mansion, he was left with his own thoughts. And in that forced quiet, he began to truly see Clara May. One afternoon, he paused in the kitchen. Susan Thompson, thin, careworn face, kind eyes, was polishing silver. Beside her, Clara scrubbed a darkened fork. But she wasn't just cleaning. She looked up and asked, "Why is it darker in some places?" Mom Susan answered gently, eyes on her work. "It's just tarnish from the air." But it's not even, Clara insisted, holding the fork to the light. It's worst in the tiny grooves, because the air gets trapped there longer. Like resentment. If you don't clean the hidden spots, bitterness builds up. Caleb froze in the doorway. A simple silver fork, just a utensil to him. In the girl's eyes, it was a lesson on human nature. Desperation began to outweigh pride. Tutors, counselors, even his father, everyone had failed. He needed help, and ironically, his savior was an 11-year-old with an old soul. That weekend, Caleb found Clara in the library, sketching in a small notebook. He swallowed hard, heart-pounding. "Hi," he said quietly. She looked up, calm. "Hello, Caleb." He fumbled. "What you said about your great-grandfather, about a way of seeing. What do you mean?" Clara closed the notebook, her blue eyes cutting straight through his armor. "Why do you want to know?" He hesitated, then blurted, "Because I think I'm blind. I see everything and see nothing. I hear and don't hear. I'm failing, not just at school, at everything." His voice broke a fragile confession. For the first time in years, Caleb told the truth. Susan stiffened, ready to pull her daughter away from the spoiled heir. But Clara raised a hand to stop her mother, then turned back to Caleb. "My great-grandfather, Sergeant Elias Peterson, was a scout in the war," she said, steady and low. "He had to move alone behind enemy lines. Not just see trees, but which branch had snapped, which stone had shifted. He had to read the story in small details. The whole platoon lived or died on that skill." She leaned in, eyes bright. "He taught me most people live on the surface their whole lives. They see the car but don't understand the engine. They hear words but never touch the meaning. A way of seeing isn't a trick. It's attention. It's understanding the why behind the what." Caleb trembled. "Can you teach me? I'll do anything." Susan watched her daughter worry and surprise mixing. Clara, suddenly severe beyond her years, spoke plainly. "I can show you, but it will be harder than any test you've ever failed. 3 conditions. Anything." Caleb gasped, desperate. First, she raised a finger. "You start from 0. Forget what you think you know about school, your father, yourself. It's all noise. Second, another finger. You do exactly what I say, even if it seems odd or pointless. There's always a reason." Finally, her eyes turned grave, chilling. "Third, you drop your pride. It's the most useless weight, the wall between you and the world. If you won't put it down, you'll never see. Caleb stared at the 11-year-old who spoke with a general's calm. In his chest, a strange spark, thin but real, flickered. I will. Clara nodded firm. Good. First lesson starts at dawn in the garden. Don't be late. And at sunrise, when the horizon was just a pale pink line, Caleb stepped into the garden. Mist lay over the ground, the air cool, the world still asleep. For the first time, he rose before the day, and everything before him felt like a foreign land. As he crossed the dew-soaked lawn, Clara May stood waiting beside an ancient oak, a guardian planted at the estate's heart. She wore simple overalls and held an empty glass jar. Without greeting, she pointed at the roots. What do you see? Caleb looked down. Only grass wet with dew, a few fallen leaves, and dark soil where the oak's roots surfaced. Irritation flared. He had climbed out of bed at a ridiculous hour to look at grass and dirt. I see grass and mud, he said flatly. Look again, Clara replied, patient but firm. Don't just look, see? Reluctantly, Caleb crouched, staring at the patch of ground. Still just dirt. Meaningless. Then a tiny movement caught his eye. A single ant hauling a breadcrumb 3 times its size, weaving through a labyrinth of pebbles and weeds. Then he noticed something else. A gossamer web strung between 2 blades of grass, dew beating like a fragile crystal necklace, doomed to vanish when the sun rose. And there, a purple bloom no bigger than a fingernail stubbornly pushing up through a crack. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps give light to voices that deserve to be seen and heard. In the dry earth. He had walked past this tree 1,000 times and never seen any of it. For the first time, he lingered, letting his eyes touch each detail, veins in the leaf, as fine as capillaries moss, spiraling around the root, dewdrops turning into tiny microscopes. What he had called dirt and grass revealed itself as a living universe, resilient, delicate, alive. When he looked up, Clara wore a faint smile. The world is full of secrets, she whispered. You only need to be quiet enough to hear, still enough to see. It was the beginning of a new journey. Clara's next lessons weren't about books or theory. They were about perception. One day she led Caleb into the vast kitchen. Jean-Pierre, the fiery French head chef, barked orders as the staff prepared Harrison's dinner party. Chaos clanged, pots colliding, oil sizzling, knives thudding in steady rhythm. Close your eyes, Clara commanded. Caleb hesitated, then obeyed. Now listen, not to noise, to the story. At first just chaos. Then Caleb forced himself to peel layers of sound. The knife rhythm steady, decisive. A spoon clattering clumsy, a newcomer. Meat searing confident, then a sauce boiling over anxious. And Jean-Pierre's voice cold pressurized, followed by a synchronized chorus of "Oui, chef." Not noise at all. A symphony of skill, tension, fear, and a hunger for perfection. Eyes still shut, Caleb frowned. They fear him. They respect him, but they're afraid. Good, Clara murmured. What else? He focused deeper. A rookie, awkward. That one, he opened his eyes and pointed to the young sous chef frantically wiping a spill, face flushed. Clara nodded, pride hidden in her gaze. For the first time, Caleb felt present in the home that was supposed to be his. The hardest lesson came a week later. Clara led him into the room he always avoided, his father's office. Medals covered the walls, photos with heads of state magazine covers praising him. To Caleb, it was a shrine to failure where he always felt small and useless. Your father called the school yesterday, Clara said softly. He wants more progress reports. Caleb's stomach nodded. There is no progress. My grades are still bad. I haven't turned in assignments for a month. He'll explode. Maybe, Clara said. Or maybe you're just reading the cover. Look around. Really look. What do you see? Caleb sighed. I see a monument reminding me I'm a failure. That's your ego talking, Clara corrected calm. Ego is a mirror. It only reflects you. Look out the window. Look at him. She pointed to a large frame photo, a young Harrison standing before a shabby garage, arms full of wires and circuit boards. No sharp suit, just a thin, tired body, eyes burning with hunger. That was his first office, Clara said. Mom told me he worked 18 hours a day, slept on the floor, put every dollar into the dream. Then another older photo, a man in work clothes standing beside a boy, young Harrison, holding a report card, eyes half fearful, half hopeful. That's your grandfather. A man who believes success is the only thing that matters. He taught your father that love must be earned by achievement, never given freely. Caleb looked again, heart-pounding. Before these were pieces of the Montgomery myth. Now he saw a young man who once trembled. A person taught that worth equals success. Those awards weren't weapons of comparison. They were scars of a journey. The photos with presidents and kings weren't trophies. They were signposts along a lonely, brutal road. For the first time, Caleb stopped seeing a god on a pedestal. He stood in his father's office with new eyes. Now he saw a human story, a brilliant, ambitious man riddled with wounds. A man haunted by the belief that failure means being unworthy of love. He doesn't push you because he despises you, Clara whispered, reading his mind. He pushes because he's afraid. He doesn't know another way to show he cares. The words struck like a blow. Years of anger melted into a raw empathy. His father wasn't a tyrant. He was a prisoner in the cage his own father built, and he had unknowingly passed that cage to his son. That night, Harrison came home late, shoulders heavy. He walked past Caleb in the hall with only a curt nod. Once that would have sparked Caleb's fury. This time, he drew a slow breath, heart pounding. Dad, Caleb called. Harrison stopped, impatience flickering. "What is it, Caleb? I have a dozen calls to make. I saw your old photo, the one in the garage." Caleb's voice shook. It must have been hard starting with nothing. Harrison froze, suspicious. He waited for a sarcastic jab, a plea for money. Nothing, only an honest gaze, truly curious. For a second, the hard lines around his mouth softened. "It was," he said hoarsely, the bite gone. Those were different times. He hesitated, wanting to say more, but habits held him back. A short nod, then he moved on. Not a deep conversation, but a beginning. A clear note in the noise. For the first time, Caleb wasn't talking to a CEO or a patriarch. He was talking to his father. And for the first time, that father listened. Caleb stood in the hall, something strange spreading through him. He hadn't passed a test or fixed a transcript, but he had seen something. He had connected, and that was worth more than anything he owned. He knew the road ahead was long. His grades were still bad, his future still foggy. But for the first time, he felt solid ground. The world was coming into focus, detail by neglected detail. All thanks to the housekeeper's daughter, who showed him that the secret wasn't finding the right answers, but learning to ask the right questions. Caleb's change wasn't an explosion. It was a quiet dawn. Lessons in the garden and kitchen began to tint everything. On the bus, he stopped feeling ashamed and started observing. A mother with 3 kids sat in the front, clutching crumpled bills, worry etched in her eyes. 2 teens in the back laughed loudly, but the laughter never reached their tired eyes. Caleb realized everyone around him wasn't a side character in his story, but the protagonist of their own. Even school shifted. He entered history, the class his father mocked him for failing, and listened for the first time. Mr. Gable lectured on the Industrial Revolution. Before it had been dates, inventions, distant names. Now it was a story, despair and ingenuity, families abandoning fields for a better dream, then being crushed by an unrelenting machine. On the screen, a photo of coal miners, grimy faces, weary eyes, bodies bent. You see, the teacher said harsh conditions, low pay, long hours, a hard time for the working class. From the back, Kyle sneered, "They look miserable. Why not get better jobs?" A few snickers rose. Once Caleb would have stayed silent, maybe even laughed along. This time, another feeling surged, not anger, but the need to correct the story. He raised his hand. The room stilled, even Mr. Gable. There were no better jobs, Caleb said, clear and steady. Look at their hands, calloused, cracked. They've used those hands their whole lives. The man in the middle, his shoulders slumped not just from fatigue, but because he knows this is his fate. And the boy on the left, maybe not even 12. He isn't looking at the camera. He's looking at the man beside him, maybe his father. In his eyes, that's not just a worn-out miner. He's staring at his own future. Silence settled over the class, and in that moment Caleb knew he had truly seen. The room stayed stunned. Kyle gaped. Mr. Gable slowly lowered his laser pointer, seeing Caleb not as a failure, but as a real student. "Excellent analysis, Caleb," he said, astonished and respectful. Warmth flooded Caleb's chest. Not the thrill of a new car or an expensive watch, but the feeling of being seen, of understanding. For the first time, he felt his value didn't come from the Montgomery name, but from how he saw the world. From then on, he used Clara May's method for everything. In literature, he stopped memorizing symbols and listened for the author's pain, joy, and reasons. In physics, formulas became invisible laws with wonder, from planetary orbits to a baseball's curve. His grades shifted not by miracle, but by work. F to DD up to CE. For the first time, he truly tried. He stayed late in the library, asked questions in class, stopped being a spectator, and joined his own life. His father, of course, noticed. The improved reports didn't make him proud, they made him suspicious. "What is this, Caleb?" he asked one night, waving the report. "Did you finally pay someone to take your exams? The grades are still bad, but at least not catastrophic." Caleb clenched his fists. "I'm just trying." "Trying isn't enough," Harrison snapped. "Only results matter. Finals are in 3 weeks. They decide if you graduate. Don't disappoint me again." The pressure was crushing. Caleb knew he couldn't climb alone. He went to Clara. In the greenhouse, she misted delicate white orchids. "He doesn't believe me," Caleb choked. "I'm really studying, but he thinks I cheated." Clara kept misting. "What he believes doesn't matter," she said. "What you do does. Opinions are weather, always changing. Your actions are the ground, make it solid." "But how can 3 weeks be enough?" Caleb burst out. "How do I learn a whole year?" Clara looked up, blue eyes sharp. "You don't need to relearn it. It's in your books and notes. You need to connect. History, science, literature, these aren't islands. They're one continent. Find the bridges." So instead of flashcards or outlines, they took over the mansion's abandoned ballroom and turned it into a giant whiteboard. They started with the Transcontinental Railroad, his great-great-grandfather's legacy. The history book says, built from 1863 to 1869. That's a fact. Cold. Dead. "Now breathe life into it," Clara said. Caleb thought. The Civil War was on. The government needed the West connected to hold the country together. Good. Political bridge, Clara nodded. Science steel. The Bessemer process had just emerged. Cheap, strong steel for rails, and explosives to blast through mountains. Science bridge. Clara drew an arrow. People, immigrants, mostly Chinese and Irish. Exploited, paid next to nothing. Thousands died. Social bridge, Clara whispered. And the stories. Songs and poems about prairie loneliness. The danger of the work, hopes for a new life. That's the literature bridge. For 3 weeks, they filled the whiteboard with branching links. The stock market tied to fear and greed. Shakespeare's sonnet structure tied to the golden ratio. The world stopped being fragmented, it fused into a vast tapestry. Caleb no longer crammed. He understood. Late one night over tea and a tray of sandwiches, Clara's mother had quietly left. Caleb asked, "Your great-grandfather. How do you know him so well?" Clara was silent, then took a worn leather notebook from her backpack, its edges yellowed. She handed it to him. The pages were packed with tiny, even handwriting. Not a soldier's log, but a philosopher's notebook. One entry saw a web this morning. Wind tore it. The spider didn't complain, didn't mourn. It began again. Nature doesn't understand pride. It only understands purpose. Another, the captain told us to hate to see the enemy as monsters. But through the scope, I saw only a boy my son's age, wiping his gun, shaking just like me. The most dangerous weapon in any war isn't a gun. It's the story we tell ourselves about the other side. Caleb looked up, throat tight. He wrote this in the middle of war. Clara nodded. He believed that to survive life's ugliness, you must find the hidden beauty. To fight hatred, you must seek understanding. He didn't fight for flag or country. He fought for the belief that, even in the darkest dark, we still have another way to see. She paused, then whispered, "He received the Medal of Honor, not for one heroic act, but for reading patterns, for seeing what no one else saw." Caleb closed the notebook, hands trembling. In his eyes, Clara May wasn't just the housekeeper's daughter. She was a bridge carrying a soldier-philosopher's legacy to a boy who thought he'd lost everything. Because of her, he saw a way out of his golden cage. Clara May's great-grandfather wasn't a hero because he was a great soldier, but because he was a great seer. 3 times he saved his unit from ambush, not through muscle or guns, but by seeing what others missed. After the war, he refused honors, lived quietly, and passed his wisdom to his great-granddaughter. He said, "The world is broken," Clara whispered, "and the only way to mend it is to raise a generation that can see. Not just stare at the shards, but learn how to fit them back together." Caleb understood. Clara May wasn't just bright. She was a keeper of a legacy, a conduit for a secret carried from bloody trenches to this very moment, and now she was sharing it with him. The first exam day arrived. History. Caleb sat down unexpectedly calm. The essay began with the old nightmare question, analyze the economic, social, and political factors that led to the Great Depression. He picked up his pen. This time, he didn't write only about the crash of 1929. He wrote about a nation's fragile psyche living on credit, about the Dust Bowl driving millions off their land, about Woody Guthrie's songs, Dorothea Lange's piercing photographs, John Steinbeck's pages. He didn't just answer. He told the story. He was the last to leave, handing the paper to Mr. Gable and catching the teacher's quiet, hopeful look. Caleb stepped outside, not knowing if he'd passed or failed. For the first time, it didn't matter. He had done it for himself. 2 weeks of exams felt like a marathon, each subject a bridge Clara had taught him to build, math to poetry, history, to science, human beings, to pain and hope. When he left the last exam, he wasn't drained, he was electric. In the library, he found Clara shelving books. He said nothing. She looked up with a bright smile. "You did it," she said. "I don't know," he confessed, "but I feel different, like I just woke up. That is the only test that matters." Clara replied, sliding the Odyssey back into place. A week later, the official results reached Harrison first. He called Caleb into the study. The room that had felt like a courtroom now seemed different. A complicated refuge of a complicated man. Harrison sat behind the massive desk, a single sheet in hand, his face granite. "I spoke to Northwood's headmaster this morning," he said flatly. He slid the paper across. "Your final grades." Caleb's hands shook as he opened it. History B+, Literature B, Economics C+, Physics B. He had passed them all. From the bottom, he had climbed to decent in just weeks, almost impossible. Triumph surged in his chest. He looked up, waiting. For a smile, a handshake, praise. Numpern. Harrison leaned back, eyes narrowing cold. "An extraordinary improvement," he said, voice low and menacing. "So extraordinary, it's unbelievable. No student jumps from a 0.8 GPA to 2.8 in one term." No one. The air froze. "What do you mean?" Caleb whispered. "I mean, you cheated." Harrison said, each word a stone. "I don't know who you paid or what tricks you used. But this isn't real work. It's a con." He slammed his hand on the desk. "I can tolerate a fool, but I will never tolerate a cheat in this house." Caleb went numb. For the first time in his life, he had studied and done the work, and his own father called it a lie. The injustice speared his chest, stealing his breath. Old anger surged, but this time the fire forged him. He looked straight at his father, and instead of a tyrant, saw the boy in the old photo, young Harrison, trembling under his own father's harsh gaze. A man trapped in a cage of achievement, too blind to see growth right in front of him. "No," Caleb said unexpectedly, calm, sharp as a blade. "I don't think you're stupid. I think you're blind. You've stared at balance sheets and stock prices so long you forgot how to see a person. When you look at me, you don't see a son. You see a bad investment. You taught me the price of everything. but never the value of anything. He set the transcript back on the desk. I didn't do this for you. I did it for me. Believe it or not, that's your problem, not mine. I don't need your approval anymore. I am not a line item in your ledger. Caleb turned and walked out, leaving Harrison Montgomery speechless for the first time in his life. The king on the golden throne suddenly sat powerless and alone. Outside, Caleb found Clara May on the steps, quietly watching the sunset. Susan, her mother, was packing her bag to go home. He sat beside Clara, a heavy sigh escaping. He didn't believe me. I know, Clara replied, soft as a breeze. Susan looked at him, eyes full of aching sympathy. Your father is a hard man to please. It's okay, Caleb whispered, telling himself as much as them. I'm done trying. He looked at Clara, the 11-year-old who had changed his life, and murmured, How can I ever repay you? Clara glanced at her mother. A silent nod. Susan swallowed. There is one thing. It's about my brother. He worked for your father's company for 20 years. A loyal programmer. When the big data breach happened, they needed a scapegoat. He was blamed, fired, publicly shamed. We lost everything. Clara's voice tightened. He was innocent, but no one believed him. Your father needed a quick answer, a sacrifice, and the pieces clicked. Clara didn't just want to save him. She carried a mission justice for her family. 2 days later, Caleb locked himself in the library, not to study, but to sift company files, network logs, financial reports. He used the way of seeing Clara had taught him. He didn't hunt for a single smoking gun. He searched for the story, the gaps, the cracks in the picture. He found it a digital trail buried for years, a chain of secret transactions leading straight to Kyle Jennings, Sr., a rival on the board, father of Kyle the bully on the bus. A shadow coup, and Clara's uncle was the sacrificial lamb. Caleb printed everything, laid it out on a clear timeline. He carried the file into the study. Harrison turned suspicious. Caleb said nothing. He placed the papers on the desk. Harrison opened them. His face shifted confusion, irritation, shock, then a quake at the roots. The powerful CEO mask fell away. Only a man remained, one who realized he'd ruined a life, not out of malice, but out of pride and blindness. How did you find this? Harrison stammered. I learned how to see, Caleb said. For the first time, Caleb watched tears blur his father's eyes. My God, what have I done? From that day, Clara May's uncle was exonerated and his honor restored. Harrison Montgomery not only reinstated him, but apologized publicly, an honest apology that changed the Montgomery legacy. Caleb never went back to Northwood. He chose public school and graduated with honors, and father and son began to truly talk. They didn't always agree, but they listened. They stopped being CEO and heir and became father and son, mending the broken bridge one plank at a time. One night under the moon, Caleb found Clara in the garden, a book open on her lap. My uncle wants to thank you, she said. You gave him his name back. No, you did. You taught me. Caleb smiled. But why me? Why did you choose me? Clara closed the book, her blue eyes reflecting moonlight. My great-grandfather used to say, you can't fix a broken world by fighting the people who broke it. You have to teach their children how to see. Only they can make the kings realize their palaces were built on sand. Caleb looked out at the glowing mansion, the perfect lawns, a kingdom of wealth. But now he knew the real treasure wasn't in the safes or the vintage garage. It was an 11-year-old girl with the greatest secret in the world, the courage to truly open one's eyes. And our story pauses here. If you're still listening at this moment, perhaps you feel it too. Sometimes the most precious thing isn't power, money, or success, but a way to see the world. Before you go, I want to ask, where are you listening from right now? On a late bus, in a quiet room, or resting after a long day? Share it in the comments. I read every line. And if you'd like us to meet again in the next stories, please like and subscribe. It truly makes a difference. Thank you for your time. And remember, sometimes to see the truth, all we need is the courage to open our eyes.